The Planted Runner is sponsored by Liquid IV. Tear, pour, live more. Go to liquidiv.com and get 20% off your first order with code PLANTED at checkout. This is The Planted Runner. I'm Coach Claire Bartholic. Raise your hand if you thought you'd run just one marathon and be done with it. Yep, me too. Once you do one, most of us want to run the next one even better than the last. We want to fix all the mistakes we made the first time and train to be faster than before. But let's face it, most of us aren't Olympians. We're parents and people with full-time jobs, and we're not in our 20s anymore. But we still want to get the best out of ourselves every time we train and line up at the start. So what's the best way to do that? Let's find out. Welcome to The Planted Runner. I'm Coach Claire Bartholic, and my mission is to help you improve your running, your mindset, and your life with science-backed training and plant-based nutrition. Today, we're going to talk to John Davis, coach and writer who holds a PhD in human performance. His new book is called Marathon Excellence for Everyone, and I'm going to ask him if everyone really can be excellent at it. We also talk about how regular runners can get really good at the marathon, how advances in science have made massive changes in the sport, and we'll go over some marathon training myths and mistakes that might be costing you minutes. While we don't get into the mental side of training in this conversation, don't worry, I've got you covered for your next race with my new Find Your Flow State audio training series. I'll talk about it more later on in the episode, but if you're ready right now, head to theplantedrunner.com/flowstate to learn more. As always, don't forget to stay tuned all the way to the end of the conversation for another Mental Strength Minute. Fortify your mind in 60 seconds or less. And now, my conversation with John Davis. Welcome to The Planted Runner, John.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So we're going to talk about one of our favorite mutual subjects, marathon training. So you wrote a book, Marathon Excellence for Everyone. And I got to say, is this really for everyone? Can everyone be excellent at the marathon?
You know, it was a bold choice putting that in the title, but I didn't want to write a book that was called Marathon Excellence Only for Fast People, or Marathon Excellence Only for sub 3 hour marathoners, or sub 2:30 marathoners, or whatever. And I think in the first sentence of the book, I say that this book is for people who want to run a good marathon, whatever that means for you. Instead of just getting to the finish line. And nothing against just getting to the finish line. That's even for someone in great shape, running 26 miles at any pace is not easy.
Right.
But for people who have an ambition to run a good marathon, by their own definition, that's what I think excellence means, and that's who the book is for.
Okay. Well, I mean, we're going to get into a lot of nuance here, but are you really going to train a 2:30 marathoner the same way you're going to train a 5-hour marathoner?
No, but I think the principles of training are similar for everyone. So obviously, like the 2:30 marathoner might be running 100 miles a week, and the 5-hour marathoner might be running 30 miles a week. But you can still use the same principles of stress and then recovery, the principle of introducing something new to your body and then having your body adapt and improve, principles of training across a broad spectrum of speeds so you don't neglect any aspect of your fitness, principles of having a plan for race day. Like I think the person who's going to be competing in the elite field is going to have a different race plan than someone who's going to be back in Corral 3. But I still think they should have a plan instead of just kind of, I'm just going to show up on the starting line and hope for the best.
Yeah.
So I think the principles are what matter.
Yeah. And I think, honestly, the 5-hour marathoner and the 3-hour marathoner, the numbers as far as mileage might look different, but time on feet could actually be pretty similar.
Yeah. And one of the nice things about the way I approach marathon training, which is with using like percentages of marathon pace, so working at like 90% or 105% of marathon pace for workouts, is it kind of naturally scales versus like if you're just like, oh, I'm going to do a 2-hour long run. Great. If you're running 2:30, that's probably all you need. But if you're running 5 hours or 4 hours, like this is not even half the race. So
Right.
I do think you want, you do need to be thoughtful about how you scale some of these things in terms of like what you said, time on feet. This looks very different for different marathoners.
Yeah. And it also looks very different for somebody who is in their 40s and has a job and has kids and has a life, I mean, those are the things like, that what I described is my, is my bread and butter, my ideal client. Yes, they want to be great at the marathon, but excellent is kind of a tall order, with everything going on in their lives. So, do you talk about that? How does that fit in?
Yeah, I think this is why I like, I want people to define excellence for themselves. I had a group of people like beta test the training plans back in the spring. And it was really interesting to see a really broad range of runners from all the way from like pretty competitive people like in the elite field all the way down to like, I just had a kid and I'm getting back into running and, I'm trying to break 4 hours, whatever. And seeing how different people approached that problem of like, what is good marathon for me? And letting people define it. Some of the experiences that I was most happy about actually were not people running super fast times or big PRs, but it was them coming back to running after having their second kid, or running well just on a hard course in tough conditions.
Yeah.
Not nowhere close to their PR, but something that they could feel good about. So yeah, I think if you define what excellence means for yourself and you are able to set that goal or which may be something objective or it may be something just like subjective and internal, finishing the race and feeling like, yes, given everything going on in my life, this was a good result for me. I think that's the important thing. And that's actually what keeps people motivated, like long term.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you think a lot of science that we have learned in the last few years about the marathon is taken from elite training because, it's recorded, it's high, there's a lot going on there. There's a lot of money going into, all of these things. So, when we look at elites, they're going to be training differently than the regular people. So should we be basing our training on science that is learned from elite runners?
Well, I think the thing I would say is actually the same answer to the training question, which is trying to figure out the principles underneath. So you read some study on elite marathoners and they're taking 100 grams of carbs per hour because they got someone on a bicycle in this exhibition race handing them a bottle with their like personally calibrated fuel. And like, well, look, you're back in Corral 3. You don't have custom bottles at the aid stations. You just got whatever you can carry and whatever you can grab. But maybe you can learn something from, okay, well, it does seem that if you increase your carb intake during the marathon, you do have more fuel coming in that you can put to use. There are also findings that suggest that if you are having trouble getting carbs down, there's so-called gut training you can do to improve your ability to get it down. And then the other thing I would say is that one of the things that has been most exciting for me in kind of my science world background is in the last 5 or 10 years is actually seeing more large scale research on regular runners. So one of the cool things about platforms like Garmin Connect or Strava is that there are now big giant swaths of people out training with the same and getting data that used to be only collected for elite runners. So there have been some really interesting studies on what for like people who run 3 or 4 days a week. What are the major risk factors for injury? What are the determinants of who slows down more at the end of the marathon and who doesn't? How common is it to have your essentially your effective fitness, your called physiological resilience, how common is it for that to deteriorate over the course of the race? You used to have elite runners in a lab with fancy equipment, and now people have heart rate monitors and GPS watches, and it gets automatically uploaded to the cloud. And there is actually useful research on more than just elite runners now, which is really great.
Yeah. So what are the answers to all those questions? I'm sure everybody wants to know.
So, all right. Let's see what I said.
So injury rates,
major drivers of injury. This is actually a finding just in the last few months. But a pretty important thing is not so much increases in your total weekly mileage, but increases in your longest individual run.
I saw that. So explain that again for the people who haven't seen this. What were they studying?
So basically, this is a group in Scandinavia that has, they work with Garmin. So they have this big database of like thousands of people. And also they're filling out like surveys on, did you have an injury this week and how bad was it? And so they can go back and look at, all right, is the so-called 10% rule, is that a predictor of injury? Turns out, no, actually not really. You can increase like 25, sometimes even almost 30%. It's only till you get to like 30% that you start seeing a mileage risk increase. But a more powerful risk factor for injury is looking back at the last, I forget the exact time period. I think it was like 4 weeks or 5 weeks. What is the longest run you do? And then do you do a run that's way longer? So if you've been, if your long run, the last 3 weeks was 10 miles, 11 miles, 12 miles, and then you do 17 miles, that is a big risk factor for injury. And it kind of suggests that there's various hypotheses on like how damage accrues to the body. But that sort of suggests there's this like compounding effect the longer you get, and that your body can adapt to that, but only if you build up that longest individual run gradually.
Yeah, this is something that I want all my runners to know, because I get a lot of people who are training for a marathon on 30, 35 miles a week. And you can run a marathon on that kind of mileage, but then they want to do a 20-mile long run. And I'm like, no. And I get a lot of pushback, and they're like, well, how am I going to be ready for the marathon if I don't run a 20 miler or 22 miler? And I'm like, that's just too much for you to, and they surprise themselves and they actually do it. But this is actual real science about why it's a bad idea to run these really, really long runs on low mileage. So what should people do instead?
Yeah, there's a couple strategies you can do. You can load up a couple days in a row that are like kind of high. So you can take, like, maybe you still only run 35 or 40 miles in a week, but you can kind of concentrate some of that into like a block. So maybe you do 3 days in a row at what would be 50, but then the rest of the week is lower. So then it's only 35.
Right.
And then another thing is trying to kind of put the pieces of the marathon together, or kind of assemble them separately in the week. So maybe you do some running at marathon pace on Monday. You do a long-ish run on Thursday, and then on Sunday you do maybe something a little bit faster than marathon pace. And so you're kind of like touching on different aspects of the marathon, like running the pace you want to run, finishing faster. Going something that's somewhat long, maybe not, you don't have to be out there doing a crazy 23-mile run, but you kind of have these like separate pieces. And then on race day, you can put them together. And that's one of those principles that's also, even for somebody running 100 miles a week, they still don't do 24 miles at marathon pace in training. That's like, similarly, that's right. Way too hard, even for them. So it's a similar strategy of like, okay, we got this big thing, break it down into pieces. We'll work on the individual pieces. And then over time in training, sometimes, depending on how much you run and how sophisticated your training is, you can put more of those pieces together. Maybe you do a run that's at marathon pace and then you finish it faster also. So that's like putting two pieces together. And then eventually on race day, that's when you put everything together. You go long and fast for the full distance of the race.
Right.
And then take plenty of recovery afterwards, because it's going to be pretty hard on your body.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to bring up marathon pace, because that is another one of those questions that you get all the time. Coach, what's my marathon pace? What's my, let's say I ran a 4-hour marathon and it's my second marathon. What am I going to be able to run for my third marathon? Am I going to get 3:30? Am I going to get 3:15? Am I going to get 4:10? So coach, what's my marathon pace?
One of the things that I try to get people to do is not decide the answer to that question on week 1 of 18.
Yes.
And actually, so in the book, what I do is I have this first phase of training, a so-called general phase, where you're kind of building up your base across a wide range of speeds. I actually use percentage of 5K pace as the basis for training. I don't want people to think about like, I'm trying to break 4 hours for that's about this, 8 something per mile, and I'm not running that fast right now, and I'm to week 2 and I'm already off the plan. So I want people to improve their general fitness first, then start doing some marathon specific work, both at speeds a little bit faster than marathon pace, and then also speeds a little bit slower than marathon pace. So you can kind of narrow in on like, if you find a pace that's like, okay, this is like fast and aerobic, but definitely I don't think I could run this for the marathon. And then below, like, this feels a little more controlled than I could do for the marathon. I could probably do the marathon at this pace right now. And then you kind of go halfway in between, and then you do some workouts at that. You see how it goes. You see how you're improving your fitness over time. And then maybe you adjust it up, maybe you adjust it down. I think there's more of a dialogue between you and your training that you need to do to choose your marathon pace. And now I understand, like, if your workouts are indicating like 4:02, like, it's going to be pretty tempting to just be like, no, I'm just going to run 4 hours or better 3:59. Right. So I understand that, and I think there's some wiggle room there depending on kind of your risk reward tolerance. But my personal preference is like, work a little bit faster, work a little bit slower than marathon pace, and then see how, especially the workouts that are somewhat longer and faster, see how those go, and then make your decision, and then revise it. It's not like if you decide on week 2, you don't have to. You can change your mind. That's fine. Sometimes
go ahead.
I was just going to say that sometimes I even have. You don't even have to decide until you're a couple miles into the race too. I like having people start slow, like not really slow, but like maybe 30 seconds a mile slower than their sort of rough target, and then just work down and see how they feel. And then like you can decide in the race, like how you're feeling that particular day.
Yeah. I think people get, kind of caught up with paces when they're training, and they say, this is an indicator workout. This is what should tell me I should run X for Y distance. Or it could be just a bad day. So what do you consider an indicator workout? So I should be able to do this for the marathon, or should we just do tune-up races? Should we do a 5K? Should we do a half marathon? Talk about, how do we know what our fitness is like? I'm talking about, somebody who's run 2 marathons, 3 marathons. They don't really, have enough experience to be able to say, oh, I can run that for the marathon, because it's all new, So how do we know what we should be feeling?
Yeah, I get a little nervous when people say indicator workouts, because in my head that means like, I'm going to really hammer this workout, and then whatever I run, that's what I'll be able to run for this distance.
Like the Yasso 800 or whatever.
Yeah, and they're like hanging on to 3:30, 800 meter pace because they really want to run that 3:30 marathon. When to me, the real indicator workout is like the workout plus how difficult the workout should be. So all the workouts I prescribe have difficulty ratings out of 10. So it's like, okay, this is supposed to be a 7 out of 10. This is supposed to be an 8 out of 10. So the indicator for me as a coach is, was your actual difficulty in that workout above or below or at what it was supposed to be? I don't really believe, like, I think if you're going to go a 10 out of 10, like that should be an actual race. Yeah. And even like 9 out of 10 is like maybe once or twice in training.
But doesn't that mean you're fitter if you overrun your paces? If I run faster in training, am I going to run a faster marathon?
Only if the effort is correct. So if you run that 8 out of 10 workout and the paces, and you actually hit like what feels like 8 out of 10 difficulty for the session, maybe it is 800 meter repeats, for example. And then you average something that's faster than what we aimed for. Great. That's good. That means you're getting in better shape. But if you turn that into a 9 out of a 10 workout or a 10 out of a 10 workout and run faster, then no, that's not getting the right training effect that we were hoping for.
After a short break, I'll be back with more of my conversation with John Davis. Race day is coming, and with it, the restless nights, the racing thoughts, and the doubts that creep in when everything is on the line. I know that feeling because I've been there too. And the breakthrough for me came when I finally stopped just training my body and started training my mind. That's when I learned how to turn nerves into calm, doubts into focus, and fear into confidence. You can learn to do this too with Find Your Flow State. It's my guided meditation course that I built just for runners, so you can have the mental clarity and focus right when you need it most, to quiet your thoughts the night before, to steady your energy on race morning, to center you before the gun goes off, and to lift you up in those miles when everything feels impossible. The more you listen, the more natural it becomes until stepping onto that starting line feels calm, powerful, and your dreams become inevitable. Go to theplantedrunner.com/flow state to get started today, because the strongest muscle in the body is the mind. The Planted Runner is sponsored by Liquid IV. You've been sweating through the summer, and finally cooler temperatures of the fall are on their way. But that doesn't mean that you should lose focus on proper hydration for running and for life. Now is the perfect time to stock up on Liquid IV's new Energy Multiplier, sugar-free hydrating energy. It's scientifically formulated to support physical energy, hydration, focused mood, and even social stamina. You already know that it hydrates better than water for your runs and your workouts, but it's also perfect for when you feel run down after a long night out, and it's what I have in my carry-on anytime I'm hopping on a flight. I especially love the blackberry lemonade flavor. Don't just power through your day, ditch the glitch with zero sugar and zero crash from Liquid IV. Tear, pour, live more. Go to liquidiv.com and get 20% off your first order with code PLANTED at checkout. And that's 20% off your first order with code PLANTED at liquidiv.com. And we're back with more of my conversation with John Davis. Okay, what about easy run? So, what is an easy run? Why is it important? How do you know it's easy enough? I think one of the common mistakes of new runners is they run everything at medium pace. They want to feel like everything is a workout, and they want to feel tired at the end. So, share your thoughts about easy running.
Yeah, I mean, my general philosophy is I want people to expand the range of speeds they run, just in general. So what you mentioned is classic example, right? Someone just get out, they run 9 minutes per mile every day. That's what they run. And I want them to take that tight peak around 9-minute miles and stretch it out. I want to do some running faster, some running slower, and the more you stretch that out, the better in some sense. In the book, there's a sidebar about this British elite marathoner, Emil Kires. His marathon pace is 4:50 per mile. That's really fast. Mm-hmm. On his easy recovery days after his toughest workouts, he's running 8-minute mile pace sometimes. So what's your marathon pace, and how fast are you running on your really easy recovery days? So I like to take the notion of an easy run and break it down into okay, we have very easy recovery runs. That's for just getting some blood flow going and getting your body moving again. Maybe you had a hard workout on Saturday, took Sunday off, and then Monday just going to go very easy to recover. Then you have easy runs, which are kind of the foundation underneath all of your faster running. You need a big base of being able to run actually easy to be able to do moderate speeds, strong speeds, fast speeds. And easy needs to be easy in the sense that, in a technical sense, scientifically, it needs to be below what we call your first lactate threshold, LT1, so that your body isn't progressively deteriorating over time, which is what happens when you're above that mm-hmm. threshold. And then on top of that, once you have that foundation of easy running and very easy running beneath it, then you can layer on moderate running and steady running and strong running, fast workouts. I don't think it's not that like everything ever needs to be this like mind-numbingly slow, easy pace. But if you don't run very slow, you can't run very fast. So you need to stretch out that distribution of paces.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's cross that first threshold and go into the moderate zone. So a lot of people say, oh, that's the gray zone. Stay out of it. We don't want that middle mile. We want to run fast and we want to run slow. We don't want to run, some people say that's junk miles or gray zone. So talk about the middle of your range.
Well, the middle of that range is where the marathon happens. And so from a specificity perspective, we need to train to spend a lot of time there. And that's so I'm against this notion that like there's only a couple like magic speeds that you want to run. It is the case that different speeds have different effects on your body. But again, that's kind of like a wide, smooth, continuous distribution. And so particularly even for people running 5K, I still believe in having people do those kind of like moderate, strong, high-end aerobic paces using multiple different kinds of sessions, not just, we're going to do like pure easy runs. We're going to do just like threshold 800s all the time and then like really hard 400s. That actually gets back to one of the points I mentioned earlier about like a new and different stimulus to your body. So even for like the 5K and the 10K, I still believe in that middle range. But for the marathon, it's particularly important because, like I just said, like that is where the race is happening.
Yeah.
So it's the most specific training you can do for the marathon itself.
Yeah, but the timing obviously is important. So, where you place that in a marathon build, you're not going to be giving a marathoner 200-meter repeats, a week before the race or whatever. At least I don't. I don't know if you're going to do that.
I don't either.
Okay, good. But 200-meter repeats can be beneficial at a certain point for a marathoner. Can you explain that?
Yeah, the way I think about training for any event is basically like general to specific. And I think a lot of people have this notion of like you build your base and then you do your speed work and then you have your race on top like a pyramid. And that's kind of how it works if you're training like for the mile. But the more general notion is actually general training, which like if you're running a mile or a 5K might be slow, easy endurance work. Then you start focusing in. But for the marathon is long and fast. And so general aspects are long and slow and fast. And then we kind of hone in on either end. So like you said, things like hill sprints or 200-meter repeats or like a really kind of chill effort-based fartlek, like 1 minute fast, 1 minute jog. Those are similarly far from the marathon in the same sense that like a 90-minute, a very easy long run is similarly far from a 5K. But you can use those as individual components of fitness. So for example, like being able to do short sprints up a hill or 200-meter repeats, that helps make the paces somewhat slower than that. Let's say it makes 5K pace workouts a little easier, more mechanically efficient. The 5K workouts help make your 10K pace be more like high power aerobic and mechanically efficient. 10K pace helps the half marathon pace helps the marathon pace. Yeah. And then similarly on the other end, that's my whole argument for why you need to be able to run very easy recovery runs is those help support the easy runs. Those help support the moderate runs. The moderate runs help support your marathon pace workouts. So it's more of like narrowing in on both ends. And so just like a 5K runner doesn't do a 18-mile long run a week before their race, no, the marathoner doesn't do 200-meter repeats the week before the race. But far out, when you're trying to assemble those general aspects of fitness individually, that's the nice thing about when you're far out from the race is you can work on each component separately and then put them together as you get closer to the race. Yeah,
I tend to put my runners when they're in between marathon cycles. I call it the kitchen sink phase. So I throw everything at it, just a bunch of random stuff that doesn't seem to have any thought behind it, but it's exactly it's anti-specificity. It's the opposite of everything you're doing in marathon training. And I think it's good for the brain too. Because, when you're training for a marathon, it's a slog.
Yeah, and it's also helpful to make sure you don't lose any of your capabilities. One of the things that I think can be a problem for people who run many marathons, like you do all this long training, you run this long race, take some recovery, and then you start up again with all this long, slow running. And then, if you do that over and over and over again, over time, your capacities at everything but running long start to deteriorate. So you do need your so-called kitchen sink approach, where you have kind of stimulate your body with all these different things to kind of expand your abilities across the range of speeds. I think it's also even helpful from an injury prevention situation, where similarly to the idea of like a long run that's way longer than you've done recently, I also think it's dangerous to run a lot of a speed that you haven't done recently. Like you probably don't start with 20 by 200 meters fast, right? If you haven't done anything at that speed before, because that's this brand new stress to your body and could be way outside the range of what you're ready for.
Yeah. Let's go back to fueling. We touched on it a little bit. Let's go a little bit deeper. So fueling has dramatically changed in the past 10 years. I mean, people are eating so much more than they used to. And, I ran a 3-hour marathon on 300 calories. I don't recommend that these days. So, what has changed and why, and how do we eat so much to run for performance?
So fundamentally, you could probably think of the motivation for this, for why things have changed so much, with one graph. And the graph is the following. On the x-axis, it's amount of fuel you take per hour. And the y-axis is in carbohydrates. And the y-axis is amount of external fuel that your body can burn per hour.
Okay.
And turns out, the more fuel you take, the more so-called exogenous from outside your body, the more exogenous carbohydrates you burn. Meaning, you basically are able to sustain a higher total power output because you've got all the energy inside your body. And then you can add on top this external carbohydrates. And then the other useful discovery in the last 10 or 15 years has been that back in the day, when physiologists were doing research in the 80s, the 90s, it was like, okay, we're studying fueling. Okay, so we're going to give you like pure glucose, just the simplest form of sugar. And then what happens is after you get to like 60 grams an hour, basically that curve tops out. Like even if you were taking 120 grams of glucose per hour, your body just can't burn anymore. And fundamentally, that's because the transporters in your intestines that pull that glucose into your blood, you just get saturated. But it turns out if you use a mixture of something glucose-based, so it doesn't need to be literally glucose, but it could be maltodextrin or other complex carbohydrates, plus something that has fructose in it. So doesn't just need to be fructose, but it could also be sucrose, table sugar, which is one glucose, one fructose. Glucose and fructose are absorbed in the intestine through different pathways. So basically, you take that curve and it just like shifts it up. So it turns out with a modern fueling strategy, you can take 80, 90, and in some cases, for some people, 100 grams an hour of carbs, and you just have more fuel coming into your body. And so you can like hit a higher gear when you're running fast. So that basically changed how people think about how to fuel for the marathon and for ultra events and beyond.
And this is why science has created, or companies have created, very scientific formulations. So they're not just, fueling with honey, for example, or maple syrup or natural products. They are specifically engineered to reach both of those pathways, right? So if you were going to kind of make up your own concoction, you should at least understand to have two different fuel sources, would you say?
Yeah, ironically, honey would work great because,
oh, really?
but because it is, I believe it is sucrose, which is basically like a 1-to-1 glucose fructose ratio. Something like agave nectar would be bad because it's mostly fructose. Something like if you go to like a drugstore, sometimes they have like glucose tablets for diabetics. That would also be bad because it's only glucose. Fortunately, we're at a point now where most things, Gatorade, Powerade, Martin, even just table sugar, has approximately the ratio that you're looking for. So you don't need like the most expensive, fanciest, holographic packaging product necessarily. But you also don't want to just be like, I'm going to like have a slice of pizza and a banana and,
yeah. Well, like I mean, a big complaint is that, you go out for your long run and you're spending $20 on gels, so there's got to be some kind of way to DIY it a little bit. But I can't imagine fueling with honey. You would be sick by mile 4.
Yeah, I think that's the real issue is like, and this is where like I read some of this research. It'll be like on cyclists taking 100 grams of carbs
I know
an hour.
the cyclists, but they're not bouncing around, so they can handle more.
Exactly.
It's a big difference.
It's like, as a coach, the challenge is basically always what can your stomach handle? That's almost everybody that I've worked with. That's the limiting factor is like, what can your stomach take? Can you do some training to increase that ability over time? Maybe. But for some people, like I have athletes who like they do what I will fully admit as a suboptimal, in quotes, fueling strategy, but because if they try the optimal fueling strategy, they throw up. So we gotta do something that like actually works and can get you through the race. And so you do the best you can and you try it. And in the book, I talk about some of these like gut training protocols to try to increase your ability to handle more fuel. But at the end of the day, like if something is completely making you sick, like I'm not saying like, oh no, you have to take more gels, more sports drink.
Yeah, feeling sick will slow you down too, right? So how do you train your gut? You just fuel for the marathon every long run, or should you be doing it every run? Every track workout? How talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, there's basically the strategy is like progressively getting yourself used to higher fueling rates, doing some of it during running that's close to marathon pace. Because one of the challenges, and I'm sure you've had people who face this situation where like they fuel on their long, easy runs. Like, oh, yeah, no problem. And then they get to the race and they're running fast. And then now suddenly they have trouble getting fuel down. The reason is that the rate that stuff moves out of your stomach, the so-called gastric emptying rate, takes a nosedive as soon as you start getting into like 70, 80, 90% of your VO2 max. So as your running intensity goes up, the rate at which you can absorb things goes down. Right. So that's why it's important to do some practice fueling and some like progressively increasing fueling rates in workouts where you're actually going at faster speeds. I don't think you need to be like downing gels every single workout, every single run. But being more deliberate about, okay, like we're 6 weeks out now, I'm going to try 40 grams an hour. This time I tried 30. Last time it went okay. Next week I'm going to do 50. Doing that. There's even some things of like, if you just like do a run on not a full stomach, but like you have some food beforehand so that you're not just like you have something in your stomach to get you used to having things in your stomach when you run.
After a short break, I'll be back with more of my conversation with John Davis.
When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof like Skims or Allbirds, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and great marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling and for shoppers buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. It's home of ShopPay, the #1 checkout in the world. You can use it to boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going through to checkout. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/income.
And we're back with more of my conversation with John Davis. Mm-hmm. What about hydration? So the pendulum swings on hydration, it goes from don't drink too much because people die when they drink too much, but you can have some kind of dehydration and you're not going to, hurt your performance. So how do you plan a hydration schedule for runners?
So fortunately, the best plan for hydration really is just drinking to thirst. Especially if it's a little bit different if you're in some like crazy ultra marathon race in the jungle where you got to carry your own water. I did have someone who did a race like that, and so we did have to be more. We did have to be more thoughtful. But if you're running New York, Chicago, whatever, and they have way more aid stations than you would ever need, then just drinking when you're thirsty, and like you said, not drinking when you're not thirsty, because too much water can be dangerous. Fortunately, that one's easy. You just go by your thirst, and that's actually optimal for health and also for performance, which is great.
Okay, good. So let's talk a little bit about the bonk. Classic bonk means that you're doing great until about mile 20 or 32 kilometers, somewhere around there. And then all of a sudden you slow down. So people think, okay, so it's either a fueling issue, a training issue, or maybe a strategy issue. Can you talk about those three things? What do you think it mostly is? What can we do better next time?
So I think what people used to believe, and I include myself in this, is that we used to believe, that's a fueling issue. That's when you run out of carbs. But it turns out that the best evidence is probably that most of the people who are bonking are doing so because their body is starting to break down. One of the nice new scientific findings that I've seen in the last few years was one of these large scale analyses I talked about earlier. And it was looking at heart rate over the course of the marathon, and specifically like sort of the ratio of your heart rate as a function of speed. Because obviously everybody's heart rate is different. So you can't just say, 160 beats per minute or 180 beats per minute, that's your marathon heart rate. It's different for everybody. But if you look at one individual and you look at what their heart rate is at different speeds, that relationship when they're like fresh should be relatively constant. Later in the marathon, though, for some people, what happens is their heart rate starts going up even though their speed is the same or actually getting slower. And that's a sign that when they're slowing down, it's because of this so-called physiological resilience or durability issue. Basically, let's think about that. What happens if your heart rate's going up, but you're running the same speed? That must mean that the metabolic demand, the energetic cost of that speed is going up. You're getting less efficient as you get further into the race because your muscles are breaking down, your body is reaching its limits, and doing the same thing is becoming more and more and more expensive. And what's very interesting is you can induce that exact same effect by getting people in the lab and having them run on a decline treadmill, run them down a hill for like 45 minutes. And of course, if you've ever run a really downhill race, you know that like your quads get really, really sore. Yeah. And so your running economy gets worse. It becomes metabolically more expensive to run when you do that. So essentially what's happening is when most people, when they blow up after mile 20, maybe it's because they started out too fast. And that there are also like tactical issues there for sure. But for a lot of people, their body is breaking down in a literal sense. And so the question is, how do you change your training? How do you change your race strategy?
Right.
And in some cases, how do you change your fueling to avoid that the next time around?
Yeah. So what's the answer?
So I guess my couple word answer is more long, fast running at speeds close to marathon pace.
Okay.
Because for the same reasons I mentioned a little while ago, if you just run easy, you do 16, 18 miles easy. You will be tired at the end of that run for sure, especially if you haven't gone that far in a while. But the kind of fatigue, the literal like mechanistic source of it inside your body is different than the kind of fatigue you get if you do 16 or 18 miles at more of a moderate pace, say 88 to 90% of marathon pace. So like 10% slower than you're trying to run for the marathon.
Okay.
That kind of fatigue is different mechanistically. It's depleting more glycogen. It's causing more so-called central fatigue in your brain. So that's the kind of fatigue that you need to get better at resisting in the marathon. And then also there are more basic things you can do, like running through hills if your race is going to be through hills, especially doing runs that are long enough to get you into that situation where your body is starting to deteriorate, and you push your body a little bit into that in training, and then rest and recover and improve, rinse and repeat a few times. But I think for most people, the assuming, this is a big assumption, but assuming they've got their fueling and their pacing relatively dialed in, usually it is they need to do more marathon specific work would be how I would put it.
So you're using speed as a proxy for a longer run. So if somebody, like back to the beginning when we're talking about the 35-mile-a-week runner, and they're trying to run a 20-mile run, they probably shouldn't run that long, but instead a more effective training run for that runner would be to run a faster but shorter long run. You would essentially get the effect of running longer because you're running harder. Is that what you're saying?
Kind of. I would say, like, let's say, okay, the alternatives are 20 miles easy or let's say 10 miles with 8 of them at marathon pace.
Right.
The nice thing about the 10-mile run is that at least some of it is stressing your body in the way it's going to be stressed in the marathon, like physiologically speaking. You're in that physiological zone or domain that you'll be in the marathon. Whereas, like, yes, the 20-mile run is very long and very hard on your body, but none of it is at that marathon specific kind of intensity. It's actually fatiguing your body in a completely different way. There's really cool research where they'll look at like ultra marathoners, half marathoners, and like 800 meter or 1500 meter runners, all like right after their race, and they do this like different testing on their muscles and their nervous system to show that, like, okay, the ultra marathon fatigue completely different than like the 800 meter fatigue.
Yeah.
And also different from the half marathon or marathon fatigue. Like, yes, you feel terrible after a 100-mile race or a 13-mile race or a half-mile race, but the reasons are very different. And that is highly relevant for how you prepare for whatever race it is that you're preparing for.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people put too much emphasis on the long run. And I don't know if you'll agree with me or not, but they'll say that, oh, I need this long run because I'm going to be running this long race, but they forget about what they're doing the rest of the week. It all is part of the puzzle, right?
Yeah. And here's a secret. You don't need to do a long run every single week. You can have a week where you just don't do one at all. And that is, especially for lower mileage runners, like, it's much easier to approach the problem of how do I touch on all those.
And what do you replace it with?
Just another workout, some other aspect of fitness that you need to address. Okay. So you don't need to do. It's not like Saturday is the special workout day that always has to be. Like, I feel it's funny because like we've kind of internalized that idea. I think, going all the way back to the 1960s, Arthur Lydiard, 20 miles through hills every Saturday. Like, we kind of have this idea that, like, well, of course, like, you have to do it. It's the weekend. You have to do a long run. But no, you can just do some other workout. You can do 200s on a Saturday.
Runners are very regimented. We like our numbers. We like our days to be, track Tuesday, tempo Thursday. We like everything just so. Haven't you noticed that?
Yeah. And unfortunately, that's kind of a trap because your body gets used to that. Okay. There's this Italian coach who's a big inspiration to me, Renato Canova, and he says adaptation is the enemy, which, like, I blew my mind when I heard it. I was like, adaptation is
We're trying to adapt. Wait.
But he's like, no, because once you adapt to something, now it's no longer a new stimulus to your body. Mm-hmm. So you need to seek out something new, something different. So like you do, okay, like for weeks and weeks, you do track Tuesday, tempo Thursday, long run Saturday. Well, guess what? Like, you do this next week, it's the same thing. Your body's like, no, I got this. No problem.
Yeah.
But you need to, if you want to improve, you need something different. You need to stress your body in some new way. So that's why I like changing up the stimulus, changing up workouts. I don't always achieve this goal, but I try to never have someone do the exact same workout twice in a buildup. Where even if, like, say they're doing some classic, threshold K session, I try to have it be like, okay, well, this week was 6 by K. Then we're going to do 5 by 1200, and then maybe we're going to do 4 by mile, and then we're going to do 2K, 1K, 2K, 1K. Still at the same pace, and still basically totaling 6,000 meters of running for all those workouts. But each time you do it, it is a somewhat different stimulus to your body. So you're not just repeating the same thing over and over and over and over again. And
this is why you shouldn't train for marathons all year round if you want to be good at the marathon, right?
Yes. And I think it's one thing I encourage people to do, especially if they've done like 2, 3, 4 marathon cycles in a row, is take a training cycle to do something different, something longer, something shorter, even like some unstructured time where you're sort of not really like training.
Oh, but my fitness, I'll lose my fitness.
Some of the athletes I work with who've had the best like longevity over like 5, 8, 10 years, they will train, they'll like sign up for Berlin or Chicago. They'll train really hard for it. And then they'll like go on vacation and just like hang out and, go canoeing. And then like 5, 6 weeks later or 7 weeks later, they're like, all right, ready to go. Let's get back in it. So I think it's also useful. I think I talk about this when I talk about recovery after the marathon too, where like you can take time off training without taking time off running. Right? You just like do some running, and you don't have to be like, this is more of like a psychological thing. But I think doing some it's sort of like a high level like stress and then recovery thing too, right?
Perfect. Well, I think that's a pretty good place to wrap it up, John. Again, your book is Marathon Excellence for Everyone. Super, super detailed book about running and how to train. So I hope that everybody picks it up. And where can people who want to learn more connect with you?
Best place to find me is my website, runningwritings.com. I have an email newsletter, runningwritings.com/news. That is where, if you want to be first in line to try fun new stuff that I've got pace calculators and the heat calculator. And like I mentioned earlier, the people who beta tested the plans all came from that email list. I'm on Instagram at Running Writings also, although not on it that much. But website and my email list is the best way to find me.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much for coming on The Planted Runner, John.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And now it's time for the Mental Strength Minute. Fortify your mind in 60 seconds or less. Today's topic is recite the alphabet. When negative thoughts enter your mind during a hard race or workout, distraction games can help move them out quickly and effectively. A great one is to recite the alphabet as many times as you need to. This works because the alphabet is something you learned when you were very little, so it's a very easy job for your tired brain to do. It's also completely neutral and non-judgmental, pushing away the negative with an almost mindless task. Whether you recite the alphabet or sing the song in your head, it's an effective little trick that can shift your mindset. Thank you for listening to The Planted Runner, part of the Evergreen Podcast Network. Don't forget that you can enter to win a free custom training plan for your next race and get featured on the show. Just write an Apple Podcast review and enter at theplantedrunner.com/PRLab. Of course, reviews are the #1 way to boost this show's reach, and it's a great way to tell me what you'd like to hear next because I read every single one. Have a great run today.